Hey everybody, welcome back to Wrestling Makes Sense, the show where me and John talk about professional wrestling and how much sense it makes. And this week we're going to talk about Summerslam. One thing is we're going to be talking about Summerslam next week as well. We're going to do a little review of Summerslam and see how it all works because I'm very intrigued about this Thunderdome um, idea. Like, what is? Do you know what this is supposed to be? Like, how does it work?
I believe it's some sort of like weird new sort of set that they built for the arena that they're going to be recording from for the next however many months, where it's like all kind of I don't know, built around like LED boards and stuff, and ways for people to kind of be shown in the crowd, like live as they're watching the show, I believe, and like there's going to be drones apparently, which are going to be buzzing around and getting brand new camera angles and whatnot, and yeah, so it sounds like it's just going to be a brand new way of presenting professional wrestling, which you've never seen before. So it's intriguing, but at the same time, it's, we've talked a lot in the past about like how we prefer it if things got a bit, closer to the old school and sort of the way it used to be. But this seems like it's moving even further away from that now, like almost to the point where it's going to look like a video game. So I'm a bit worried about it, but at the same time, you've got to give it a chance as well. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Right. We'll keep our eyes open. We'll talk more about that next week's episode, I imagine, because we'll never be able to see how it looks after SmackDown and after SummerSlam. We'll see what it all is. I just like this real quick. I was talking to somebody about sports and how it's weird that there's no fans in the crowd. I'm like, wouldn't it have been great if instead of fucking around with like video games and PlayStations and shit, people like worked on virtual reality to make this viable. Like, imagine if you wanted to go see some sports and you put your Oculus Rift on and you're watching the game live. Like,
yeah,
you've got a seat in the stadium, you look around, there's fans, it's other people with their Oculus Rifts on too, but they're all watching the show, and you're in the stands, and you can see this fucking game of baseball like live from where you're seated. Like, wouldn't that be a way better use of virtual reality than whatever the fuck they use it for now? Level 7 or whatever, like what I had the same problem with like the Kinect that Xbox did. I'm like, why are you wasting your time trying to make these things into games? Could be like actually because the games they make are going to be subpar. Like they're not going to work right. But like instead of that, try to figure out like practical uses for this technology in real life, and then you'd have a much bigger target audience.
Absolutely, and then everyone could be like sat in the front row then as well. So
right, it'd be really cool because you think you're getting front row access whenever loads of other people are too. And then what you can do is have like tiered seating. So say if you spent £100 to get a virtual ticket, and your front row seats, right? So that's one camera feed or whatever. And then you could have like a camera feed that's set a little bit further back and have that be like $50 for a ticket or whatever. Like you could tier it like a real sporting event. And then if you didn't want to watch that, for example, you could just pay, a £30 flat fee for the regular feed, and just watch it normally like you would on the network.
Yeah.
But once again, what do we know? Once again, I think that would be pretty cool. But like, of course, people didn't think of that, so now we're way behind the times. But I'm interested to see what they do with the Thunderdome. So we're going to talk about that next week when we do our SummerSlam review. But for this week, before SummerSlam, we thought what would be a good idea is to kind of whet people's appetites for SummerSlam and SummerSlams of old. And we did a episode a few weeks ago where we did some picks on the network. We were like, this is stuff you got to go out of your way to see. You should check it out. Hidden gems.
Mm.
And I think for this episode, we're going to talk about some old matches from SummerSlam's past, or some old moments from SummerSlam past, that are some of them are very good. You should go and check them out in the network. Some of them not so good, maybe. But we're gonna talk about some old SummerSlam things, and some of them are good, some of them are not so good.
Mm.
I think that's fair to say. Do you want to go first, or would you like me to go first? You probably have more suggestions than I do.
Yeah, I'll go first. And I'll go for like the most obvious one as well, because I mean, from the UK and everything, you kind of have to go back to the classic SummerSlam '92 moment where it was Bret Hart defending the Intercontinental title against his brother-in-law, the British Bulldog, in front of 80,000 fans, which is the only time that WWE have really held like one of their major pay-per-views like outside of America, North America, I guess I should say. But yeah, I mean, that whole moment was pretty special, really. Like, they essentially filled Wembley Stadium on the back of British Bulldog's popularity, and got one of their highest drawing shows of all time in the process. And then it was capped off with like a really good match between Bret Hart and British Bulldog as well, with like a pretty iconic finish as well, with like the Bulldog sitting down on the Tinted Sunset Flit and getting the 3 count. And yeah, it's just it was one of those classic WWF moments from back in the day, which has really stood the test of time since then, even if like the immediate aftermath for the Bulldog wasn't so good. Like the follow up, he wasn't too memorable for him really, because he was fired within a few months because of I think him and Ultimate Warrior were receiving shipments of like human growth hormones and stuff, so that didn't go too well for him. But this match is probably like the high point of the Bulldog's entire wrestling career.
Well, I mean, you say that, but do you remember the Bulldog fighting The Rock?
Oh, not the dog poo match.
Yeah, you remember that?
Yeah.
Classic bit. Dog poo match. That's what it was. I don't think that was a SummerSlam though. I think that was when was that? Like '99 at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a classic bit that was. I mean, you're right in that you got the British Bulldog and Bret Hart, two guys who know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You're bound to have a classic match. I had heard Bret Hart talking about this match. I think it was this one. It was a match against the Bulldog anyway. I assume it was this match.
Mm.
And he was talking about how, and this will surprise nobody, and I don't mean to speak ill, but like Bulldog was really messed up going into that match.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was like super hungover, or like he was coming down, or he was going up. Something was up with the Bulldog, and Bret like talked him through all the way through that match. Apparently, which I find that kind of thing like super interesting, because if you watch that match, you could probably see like a couple of missteps from the Bulldog, but like really, it's a pretty good match, pretty darn good match, and to think that like Bret's the one like leading him all the way through that match, that's super cool,
Yeah, but I'd take it with a pinch of salt, because Bret Hart is his own biggest fan and always has been. And yeah, he has a tendency to kind of tell stories which make him out to be like the greatest of all time, and doesn't necessarily paint other people in a particularly good light. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's maybe like hyped up his own contributions to that match a bit more than he probably should have. But heyo.
I think that if it was like Bret Hart versus a lot of other people, that could be the case. But Bret and Bulldog were very close. They were family.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think Bret would go selling people that he's that friendly with down the river unless there was a legit. I mean, if it was if it was Shawn Michaels, I'm sure Bret Hart would be all over that. And you'd buy that 100%. But with the Bulldog, I feel like there's probably a lot of truth in that.
Mm.
But that's a good. Okay, that's a good pick. That was SummerSlam '92.
Yep.
Wow. Speaking of the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, I am also going to pick a Bret Hart match for one of my moments because the guy's really fucking good. You can't argue with this. And one thing I want to say before we do my pick is that we haven't discussed any of our picks beforehand, so I'm very interested to see if any of them are if we share any of the same picks. That would be very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I went with SummerSlam 1994.
Mm-hmm.
It's Owen Hart versus Bret Hart for the heavyweight championship inside a steel cage. So it's good. The blue cage,
Yeah.
which I quite like. There's a little bit of nostalgia for that blue cage, But have you seen this match?
I have. I remember watching it, live back in the day.
It's fucking good.
Yeah.
What a surprise to say that a match between Bret Hart and Owen Hart would be a fucking classic. Because, those guys didn't wrestle enough, in my opinion. It was so fucking good. I loved this match. I thought that for a cage match, like I heard somebody say to me that a cage match isn't the same as like a regular fall match because it's hard to get that suspense going.
Mm.
I disagree because I think there were plenty of times in this match whenever you're like, any of these guys could win it. There's a little sequence where like Owen and Bret just kind of keep jumping over each other to get to the door. Bret will go for the door and Owen will pull him back and then he will dive, like jump straight over Bret, dive out the door with his torso out of the cage and Bret pulls him back out and then he jumps out the door and then Owen pulls him back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Back and forth and then climbing over the cage and the finish. If you've seen I don't want to spoil the finish, but I really liked it. It was a very way to finish a cage match. I thought it was very suspenseful. There was a lot going on. I really liked that match, and this is in the middle of the show. It's the heavyweight championship cage match, brother versus brother. And it's in the middle of the show. Do you know what the main event for that SummerSlam was? You probably do remember.
Yeah, well, I think this was the semi-main event, wasn't it? But the main event was Undertaker versus Undertaker.
Yes, it was. Undertaker versus Undertaker. Now, at the time, that probably made sense. But looking back at it with 2020 vision, surely they should have put Bret versus Owen in the main event. Because I didn't watch the Undertaker versus Undertaker match, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it's not as good as Bret Hart versus Owen Hart.
Oh no, it's a total dud. In fact, it was on my list of one of the worst moments in SummerSlam history because yeah, I mean, like the whole storyline around it was pretty. Well, I mean, it was all right. Like the whole idea of the $1 Million Man trying to bring in his own Undertaker after like the real one had kind of gone missing after a casket match with Yokozuna at that year's Royal Rumble. But for some reason, like they started bringing in like Leslie Nielsen as his character from The Naked Gun and Police Squad, Frank Drebin, like investigating where the Undertaker had gone, and like that didn't really match the tone of like the story that was going on with $1 Million Man and Paul Bearer, like trying to claim who the real Undertaker was and whatnot, and it just led to this kind of boring, plodding match where, like, it was so obvious that, who the real Undertaker was and who was the fake and everything. And it was a colossal disappointment.
Well, I'm glad I didn't miss too much by not watching that. Yeah, you can see, whenever you go to the network, you can see the timestamps. You can see Leslie Nielsen all over the place. You're like, I guess this made sense in 1994, but it doesn't make any sense. Like again, looking back on it with 2020 vision, you're like, not a great, not a great call because the
Mm.
Undertaker he's always had like a little bit of obviously he's a little cartoony in that he's not really dead, not really, but at the same time, he's always had this sense of like realism to him
Mm.
a legitimacy to him. He's a big guy, and you do kind of feel like you're like, oh my god, maybe he is like a fucking inhuman monster.
Yeah.
Like he played the character so well that it was a legitimacy to it, and you really do feel like a lot of that legitimacy goes out the window when you let Leslie Nielsen on the hunt for the real Undertaker. And then Undertaker has to fight himself, which clearly isn't him. That's a low point for the Undertaker character, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was sort of around the time as well where he did get put into a lot of dud feuds with like guys like Kamala and Giant Gonzalez and whatnot, and he wasn't really able to kind of show what he could do like he was in later years when like he started feuding with Bret Hart and whatnot, and Shawn Michaels obviously as well. So yeah, this was a tough time for Undertaker's career, I'd say.
Isn't that interesting that it was probably like into 95 or 96 before Undertaker really was viewed as like the legit kind of badass that he is.
Mm.
Up to when did he start? The end of 1990, I think.
I believe so. Yes.
1990. Right up to 94, 95. That's a good 4 or 5 years where like he was a big guy, but like he wasn't really doing a whole lot.
Mm.
He said like feuds with Jack Gonzalez and stuff like that. Like he was kind of there, but it wasn't until what 5 or 6 years into his WWE career before he really started to become the Undertaker, the big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a good one. I'm glad. See, did you see how we were able to see into your bad pick? You see that?
Yeah. It was. Yeah. I mean, it almost looked like we planned that, but we definitely didn't.
No, but that's just how good we are. It just naturally makes it come together. Let me see if I can try to see. I can't really. Well, let me just tell you something bad that I have on my list.
Mm-hmm.
Around the same era, so it's kind of like a segue. It's not, but I haven't seen this match that I'm about to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
In all in all realities, it could be good. It could be one of the best matches that I've never seen. It could be a hidden gem. I don't know. I'm going to go on a limb and say it's fucking not because do you remember? Do you remember? Well, let me just say SummerSlam 1995.
Mm-hmm.
The event that was.
I believe it was Diesel versus King Mabel.
Yeah. Could you think of like a worse match at the time? Did you
I
think
mean,
match? It's fucking. Why would anybody want to watch Diesel versus Mabel?
mm-hmm.
Why? Well, for one thing, I never understood why they went with Mabel anyway. I mean, yeah, he's a big guy, but he couldn't do a whole lot.
Yeah.
Very limited. Also, his name is Mabel. That confused the hell out of me. He's a big, imposing looking dude. He's a professional wrestler. His name is Mabel. Like, who is scared of anybody called Mabel? Mabel's like the name. It's like an old lady name.
Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't. And then Diesel, Kevin Nash. I like Kevin Nash, but that's let's all be honest here. Kevin Nash never been known for being the world's greatest worker.
No, probably the world's smartest worker in terms of what he's accomplished and what he's, the actual quality of matches he's had. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true. I mean, like the guy's made an awful lot of money. Smart dude, but I don't think Mabel versus Diesel was his crowning achievement. Let's say. So you've seen this match, right?
I think so, yeah. I don't really remember too much about it because this was sort of around the era where I was starting to lose interest as a fan.
I can't wonder why.
Yeah.
Wow, with Diesel versus Mabel, how could they go wrong? I kind of want to watch it just to see how bad it is,
Mm,
but at the same time, I'm sure I've got other better things to do.
absolutely, yeah.
Maybe I'll give it a pass. But we'll see. All right, do you wanna do a good one?
Okay, so let's segue away from that then. Diesel was obviously, Shawn Michaels' bodyguard for a couple of years. Um, and then Shawn Michaels kind of, started DX, and he was famous for being a bit of an asshole. But he suffered an injury in a casket match against The Undertaker at the Royal Rumble in 1998 and retired, it seemed, after WrestleMania that year. Um, and so that was a bit of a bummer because when I finally did come back to start watching wrestling again, sort of in the summer of '98, like my favorite wrestler had retired. Um, but then, thankfully, like 4 years later, he kind of came back to the ring, made this miraculous recovery, and yeah, he had a unsanctioned match with Triple H at SummerSlam 2002, which there's a lot of bells and whistles with this match. Like they kind of uh, brought in like a hardcore element to kind of work around any possible limitations that Shawn Michaels might have had coming back, and they kind of didn't have to wrestle a traditional style match, but were still able to kind of tell a really good story, and it ended up being like a fantastic match as well. Like it was probably one of my favorite matches for a good few years. So um, yeah, the fact that it brought Shawn Michaels back to the ring, and sort of within the next year he was back full time, and obviously going for another however many years after that, it was pretty significant moment.
I 100% agree with you. I love that match. It's so good. Whenever I started watching wrestling, which would have been sometime in the year 2000, I think, like just after WrestleMania, maybe.
Mm,
I used to hear a awful lot about this man, Shawn Michaels, because by 2000 I had missed him.
yeah.
And anything about Shawn Michaels, but I heard a lot. Boy, Jr. would every opportunity, because that's how good Jr. was as a commentator, is that he could get you invested in the people that were worth getting invested in. So even though Shawn Michaels hadn't been an active wrestler, I knew all about Shawn Michaels just from JR. Like I knew that he was great. I'd never seen him wrestle.
Mm,
And 2002 rolls around, and I'm out of the kind of the kayfabe angle that I was like a year or two before that. I'm like, man, I don't know if I like wrestling anymore. But I decided to watch SummerSlam 2002 to see Shawn Michaels, who I heard so much about. And I know how good Triple H is. So I'm like, this, if it is, let's just see. Maybe it's Shawn Michaels past his prime, but I got to see at least one Shawn Michaels match. And then that match happens, and it was so good. It was so good. I'm like, I love this man.
mm-hmm.
So I think Shawn Michaels, it's amazing how he was able to have like two very different careers.
Mm,
Um, and you could argue that his return was better than his first run, you know,
yeah.
because he I don't know, he just seemed like he was putting on classic matches, and it all started from that one. And I like the idea of the no holds barred angle because while yes, it may have covered like any ring rust or limitations Shawn Michaels might have had in the ring, it really worked with the Triple H feud because him and Triple H had gone back, for so long, and Triple H uses the sledgehammer a lot at that time. So you can see where it's going. Shawn Michaels has an issue with his back. Triple H loves using the sledgehammer. We can connect the dots, and that's pretty much where they went. But it made it super effective. Then you're like, oh, how could you do that, Triple H?
Yeah.
As a kid who thought he had got out of the kayfabe stage, I'm like, how could Triple H do that with the sledgehammer? Shawn Michaels had just come back from retirement, I'm like, I'm still hooked like a fucking idiot, like a giant mark. But hey, that's the way to do it. You want to tell a good story. I thought those two told a really good story. What was the other one they had? They fought again that year. Like, was it a month later?
I think it was quite a few months later, because there was I don't think Shawn Michaels had another match until Survivor Series, when it was the Elimination Chamber, the very first one, which he won that match and walked out with the world title.
Yes.
And then after that, they had a 3 Stages of Hell match, I believe, on the December pay-per-view, which Triple H ended up winning.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. That also was very, very good. I gotta say, I went back and watched that match not so long ago, just to see if it is still good. It's still good. And then once you see a match like that, you hear JR say that Shawn Michaels is one of the best workers of all time, and then you see that match and you're like, God dang it, if he wasn't correct.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's a good match. All right, what have I got that can? Oh dear. Well, you know what I wanted to do. By the way, that I definitely thought about putting that one on my list for sure, because I love that match. I wanna dial things down a little bit. I'm gonna go to the opening match from SummerSlam 2001.
Okay.
Remember this match?
Would this be Edge versus Lance Storm?
Yes, for the Intercontinental Championship.
Mm-hmm.
I love that match. That is how you open a pay-per-view. It was exciting. Yeah. It had two guys that are super talented. It was in the middle of the invasion angle, so you already understood what the stakes were. Lance Storm was on the Alliance side, and Edge was on the WWF side, and it's a perfect example of an opening match because it's not super long. I think it's about 10 minutes. But in that 10 minutes, they do everything they need to. And they get that crowd hyped. I had never seen Lance Storm before. Very happy, but after that match, like, that was good. That was a solid match. You know what I mean? Set the tone. Got you excited for the whole pay-per-view. Really, underrated match, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you've seen it, right?
Yeah. It's one that kind of really helped legitimize like the alliance as well. Like, even though Lance Storm lost, like, he still looked competitive against Edge and what have you. But like, I guess, yeah, like, at the same time, it did sort of set the precedent for that whole angle, though, because like, it was the alliance on the losing end of the match, as the alliance would end up being on the losing end for like pretty much all of the entire feud against the WWF. So, yeah.
Here's the thing, though. Like, I think that match, yeah, you're right in that while Lance Storm did lose, if that's the first time you ever seen Lance Storm, you're like, that guy put on a hell of a fight. He stood his ground against Edge, who by that point already established as a pretty solid guy in the WWF. That's exactly the way you want to represent the alliance. So I think that match wasn't necessarily like the kind of the catalyst for how the rest of the alliance feud would go. I would argue that the cage match, the tag team cage match from later on in that night, was exactly the way the alliance feud was going to go. That was Undertaker and Kane versus DDP and Chris Kanyon.
Mm-hmm.
Not the most shining moment for any of those gentlemen.
Yeah.
I think enough has been said about that match. But the opposite of what the Lance Storm match did. It did not make DDP or Chris Kanyon look good at all, despite the fact that they were in the ring with two bona fide WWE legends. They didn't get a chance to make as good of a showing as Lance Storm did against Edge. You know, and possibly that's because Edge at the time, not a main eventer, he and Undertaker were. So it's easier for Lance Storm to have a competitive match with Edge because the stakes are lower.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas if Lance Storm were to have a competitive match with The Undertaker, you know what I mean? It's not going to fly so much. So, But yes, Lance Storm versus Edge from SummerSlam 2001. I really like that match. Do you want to do a bad one?
Okay. How about this then? So you could argue like one thing the Alliance was really missing, because it ended up becoming like a McMahon fest. Really, it was all about Shane and Stephanie. If it had more legitimacy, like at the start, maybe it would have been like a better angle, and like the perfect person to bring it legitimacy would have been Eric Bischoff, who ended up in WWF like not long after this, really, like after the whole Alliance angle had sort of run its course. And he obviously became Raw GM and stuff, and ended up like sharing the GM role with Stone Cold Steve Austin. But it also led to like this really, really bad feud with the McMahons, like Shane McMahon in particular, where Eric Bischoff kind of broke into the McMahon's home at one point and sort of forced himself on Linda. And like at the same time, Shane was in kind of getting beaten up a lot by Kane, who'd just been unmasked, and Eric Bischoff was pretty much letting Kane do whatever he wanted. But yeah, this eventually all led to like a Falls Count Anywhere match between Shane McMahon and Eric Bischoff at SummerSlam 2003, which was a really, really boring, dragged out, heatless match, really. Like, there was nothing about it which kind of grabbed the fans in attendance, who were just like sat on their hands. And then Jonathan Coachman decided to randomly turn heel and start helping Eric Bischoff for some reason, which just dragged it out even longer. And didn't make much sense as well. But that led to Steve Austin showing up and like saving the day for Shane, which, again, considering like the history between Austin and the McMahons, didn't really make a whole lot of sense, even if Stone Cold was like ostensibly the good guy in the situation. But yeah, it was just a disaster really from start to finish, and pretty typical of WWE booking at this time. Like, it wasn't the best, really.
Well, it sounds like a total shit show.
No, it was.
I don't think I've seen that. Like, I'm sure I have. Like, I feel like I've seen SummerSlam 2003, but
Yeah.
you know, for some reason, my brain seems to have blocked that particular moment out. Couldn't imagine why. What a dreadful shame, you know. But it doesn't sound like a all-star classic.
No.
Shane McMahon versus Eric Bischoff. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find that interesting. You know, not a good call on their part. It's always iffy when they start introducing the McMahons into storylines.
Definitely.
You know, it has to make sense. And I understand the angle between Eric Bischoff and the McMahons. That makes sense. But, you know, I think the way that they did it probably didn't make any sense. And also, the coach.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he have to be a heel? Like nobody cares. That's an angle I don't think that they've figured out properly. Is that a heel commentator works so long as the commentator who is a heel is actually a heel wrestler. Jerry Lawler works as a heel commentator because he's a heel wrestler. Like that's the angle, you know, or like Jesse Ventura or like Mr. Perfect or whatever. Those they work because they're heels. That's why they're heels because that's why they're heels in commentary because they're heels in quote unquote real life, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense for Jonathan Coachman, who fucking nobody knows, to turn heel because like nobody cares. Why would they? It's not.
Yeah.
It's just because Coach doesn't wrestle. It's not. It's not an interesting angle. Like they did the heel Michael Cole thing. Like, well, it doesn't make any sense for Michael Cole to be a heel. He's your lead commentator. Why would he suddenly he had half the roster? That doesn't make any sense. He was hired specifically to do this job. It doesn't make sense for him to start picking favorites now. It makes sense for Jerry Lawler to do this because he's a wrestler. I mean, he obviously became more of a commentator than a wrestler. But he was a bad guy wrestler. That's why he was showing favorites when it came to the commentary position. It doesn't make sense to have heel commentators unless they're actually heel wrestlers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the only one you can really like Bischoff can get away with that because he worked with the NWO at the time, so he was still a heel. You know what I mean? Like that works. But if you just pick a guy who's a commentator and just switch him heel, that's so bizarre. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Let me see if I have anything that's as bad as that. Well, I do. I mean, I feel like I've definitely got some things that were as bad as that. I picked a match that I don't think anybody's going to say is a classic match from SummerSlam 2007. I'm sure we've talked about this one at some point on the show. It doesn't make any sense. But it's Batista versus the Great Khali.
The
Heavyweight Championship. SummerSlam 2007. Now Batista, he's never going to be known as the greatest worker of all time. But he can carry himself in the ring. Guy knows what he's doing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He's a good worker. He's a good wrestler. The Great Khali, on the other hand, I don't think you will find a single wrestling fan who's going to put their hands up and say, I thought the Great Khali was really good. I don't think anybody in their right mind would do that. So I think the backstory for this is the Great Khali won the heavyweight championship, the World Heavyweight Championship, in a battle royale like a month or two ago, or a month or two before this situation. So he was the last one standing in the battle royale, so therefore he is the champion. Makes sense. I mean, I think that makes sense as a way to put the belt on Khali. He's a big dude. It's hard to knock him out of the ring. Fair enough. Makes sense. It's not like he beat John Cena for the fucking heavyweight championship, right? No. If you're gonna put the belt on this guy, that's one way to do it. The problem is, what do you do with him after that? Because God knows what you're gonna do. So after this, they have like a triple threat match. I think it's Batista and Kane and Khali at whatever pay-per-view is before SummerSlam. And Khali somehow sneaks away with a win.
Of course.
Of course, the biggest guy in the match sneaks away with a pin, So the next month, they have the marquee match, Batista versus the Great Khali. I can't imagine anybody being excited for it. I understand the logic behind it. People want to see the belt on somebody other than the Great Khali, right? But that's not necessarily heel heat. That's definitely go away heat.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the same. If the Great Khali was a good heel and then did this angle, you could understand it. But he just was there and he won the belt and nobody wanted him to win the belt. So come SummerSlam, Batista, everybody's like, fine, Batista can win the belt, that'll do. No, the Great Khali gets himself disqualified, so he retains the World Heavyweight Championship. So they made this go on for another month.
Mm.
And again, I understand the idea behind Khali getting himself disqualified. That's heel heat. But he hasn't done anything to why they would prolong this experiment for any longer than they need to is so I would say that's not one of the shining moments of SummerSlam history.
No, I think the whole reason that came about there was, I believe, the Undertaker got injured, and then Edge got injured as well, which is why he ended up dropping the title or vacating it, I should say, and that set up the Battle Royal that Khali won the title in. So it was probably a case of like the SmackDown world title scene not really having enough stars in the mix who could have stepped up to the plate, I guess. Because again, this was sort of not long after the time that Chris Benoit had obviously uh, you know killed his family and himself as well. So like this was a pretty rough period for WWE in general. So I guess in that regard, you can say like, okay, maybe Cali was like the best of all the shitty options they had going for them, but Jesus Christ, they could have stuck anyone else in there, and it would have been better.
What was Kane doing?
Kane was, I don't know, because like you say, he was in that triple threat match the month before.
Wouldn't Kane versus Batista have been a way better match?
I believe he was fighting Finlay in one of the first matches on the card for some reason. I can't remember what the reason for that match was though.
God's sake. What was CM Punk doing?
CM Punk was in ECW still at the time.
Cowards.
Yeah.
Cowards. They could have put the belt on him. Or put the belt on Batista and make him fight Punk. There were options.
Yes, yeah.
What I'm saying. And they didn't take any of them. They went with Cali. They made their bed. They got to lie in it. So, fair enough. Yeah, not so good. Do you have another good one?
It's not so much a match, but one that kind of I hold near and dear to my heart because it was one that kind of sticks out a lot in my memory from when I was a kid watching wrestling growing up. And this is when the Mountie, who I've always had a soft spot for, lost to the Big Boss Man in a jailhouse match back at SummerSlam 1991. The match itself isn't anything really to write home about, or it's not like an all-time classic or anything. But it's the whole like the skits that came afterwards, where the Mounties like being dragged off by, I believe it was like New York police or whatever, but they were like dragging him to their paddy wagon and then like taking him to the jail and booking him in, getting his fingerprints and stuff, all while the Mounties just like going over the top, like trying to claim he's like an international law enforcer and shouldn't be subjected to this kind of treatment and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's just a funny moment, really.
So you wouldn't advise me to go watch that match? More after it?
I mean, yeah, it's not essential, I'd say, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, I haven't seen that. That was before my time, and I have been trying to like go back and watch some of the old classic stuff. So I don't think I've seen anything from some 1991. So I could maybe go back, give that a little check out.
It does end a bit dodgy though, where like the final kind of joke in it is Mounty's thrown in a cell with like a couple of other convicts, and as like the cops walk away, like one of these convicts kind of comes up to him speaking like in a really effeminate way, like asking if he loves the way that leather feels against his body, uh, which is, yeah, it's a bit eye rolling, but like everything before that was pretty funny.
I mean, that's peak WWF, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
That hasn't changed at all.
No, you can imagine Vince McMahon sat in the truck like laughing his ass off at that.
You know that if they were to do an angle like today, if they did an angle on Sunday at SummerSlam where somebody went to jail, Vince McMahon's like put a put an effeminate gay guy in there too in the South. It would be great. Everybody will love it.
Yeah.
Because what Vince is like. Him and his jokes. All right. Well, How about this? Why don't I give you a classic match to go back and watch?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody listening to this, I heavily advise you to go back and watch this match. I'm gonna pick the match from SummerSlam 2013.
Mm-hmm.
You guess which match I'm gonna pick?
Would this be? Is it CM Punk against Brock Lesnar?
It is indeed CM Punk versus Brock Lesnar. No disqualification. Oh, what a beautiful match that is. Now, we've slagged off Brock Lesnar plenty of times before in the past, but the fact is, the guy knows how to work, and his shit looks real. Like, his shit looks really good. His striking, his offense, but also like his defense and his selling. The guy's very, very good. We give him a hard time because we were fed up of seeing him on TV. We were oversaturated with the Brock Lesnar. But when you go back and watch him, guy knows how to work. CM Punk, of course, I fucking love CM Punk. And I like, funnily enough, CM Punk hits like one of the worst elbow drops I've ever seen. Punk, I love Punk to death, but he's never been one for hitting a good elbow drop off the top rope. He tries, God bless him, but it never looks too good. And he hits an elbow drop that barely looks like an elbow drop on Brock Lesnar. So I gotta take a point off of the match for that. But the rest of it's beautiful. Such a good match, It's physical, it's violent, it's a lot of fun, and it's not over in 2 minutes, like a lot of more recent Brock Lesnar matches have been. And I think that takes the fun out of it. When they're like that again, that works once, but if you do it 3 pay-per-views in a row, the fun gets taken out of it. You get a fucking half-hour classic out of guys like Brock Lesnar and CM Punk, you're in for a good time. So I would highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen that match, go back and watch that match. You'll have a good time.
It's funny you mention like that kind of match that we don't really see from Brock Lesnar very often, because like I was almost tempted to go for Brock's match from the following year's SummerSlam where he was against John Cena, which was memorable because it was just a complete destruction of Cena. He basically just spent 10 minutes or whatever just suplexing him constantly, and Cena did a hell of a job of selling all these suplexes, didn't really get in much offense and stuff as well. And it really, helped solidify the mystique of Brock Lesnar, like especially coming out of WrestleMania 30 and ending the streak and whatnot. But like this was like the perfect follow up to beating the Undertaker at WrestleMania, because it was just a match against the WWE champion at the time, and he like just destroyed him with ease in the kind of thing that we've just never seen before. Like you don't expect that at all, and it was so shocking and so brutal that it immediately established Brock Lesnar as this force who he's been able to like help continue riding that momentum like ever since, really.
Yeah, that's a good call, man. I forgot about that match. That's a good one, because it showed like this kind of vulnerability to John Cena that you hadn't seen in a long time. Okay, should we wrap things up? Have you got any other things you want to talk about real quick?
Not really, no.
Okay, that was the end of your list?
Yeah, that'll do me. I mean, we've mentioned like the Nexus and like their loss before in our previous podcast about that. So, but that was like the only other really terrible booking decision I can. The one that stands out the most anyway.
Okay, well, I want to real quick. I want to give you another blast from the past, not necessarily a good one. I want to talk about SummerSlam 1999. That, unironically, is one of my favorite pay-per-views like ever. I love watching SummerSlam 1999, and a lot of it is like nostalgia factor. You know, I can't help it. Everybody has nostalgia for something, and I have a real soft spot for that because my favorite wrestler growing up was Mick Foley, still is. And I remember watching this show. You know, if you're a wrestling fan at that time, you know who Stone Cold Steve Austin is. You know who Triple H is. You might not have heard of Mankind. You could probably guess who is going to lose a triple threat match between those three people. And I remember watching it for the first time and just, you know, and it's not a classic match, but I was very happy to see that match. Very, very happy. And so I have fond memories of that pay-per-view. There's lots of fun moments in it, like the hardcore match between Al Snow and Big Boss Man. Lots of fun because the Blue Meanie and Stevie Richards run in at the end of it to attack Al Snow. And then he no-sells both their attacks and beats them up. That hardcore match, lots and lots of fun. However, I mean, you know, I can be as nostalgic about it as I like, but I have to admit that the pay-per-view is not perfect. So let me tell you about a little thing very quickly called The Rock versus Billy Gunn in a Kiss My Ass match. SummerSlam 1999, where Billy Gunn comes to the ring with what's the best way to say this? A rather large lady underneath a sheet, which I don't get why he bothered putting her under a sheet. Because he had to walk her down the ramp and into the ring while she's still wearing a sheet over her head so that nobody can see what she... Like, we all know what's under the sheet. Woman, right? That's peak WWE 1999 humor. It's going to be a fat woman under the sheet. Billy Gunn pulls the sheet up. It's a fat woman under the sheet. Billy Gunn says, I'm going to beat The Rock tonight, and whenever I beat him, he's not going to be kissing my ass. He's going to be kissing her ass, right? Another hilarious joke about how horrific fat people are. What a classic WWE. Fucking monsters. And again, if you go into a match between The Rock and Billy Gunn, who do you think is going to win?
I mean, The Rock, obviously.
It's going to be The Rock. So I thought there were no stakes in this match. I'm like, The Rock's not going to lose to Billy Gunn. The Rock's not going to be kissing this lady's ass. The Rock beat Billy Gunn and forced him to kiss the ass of this lady who loved it. She was having a great time. Not a highlight for either man's career, I would dare say. Billy Gunn, I'm gonna say Billy Gunn didn't have a great 1999. The Rock did, but Billy Gunn, I don't understand why they called him Mr. Ass. And this, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but it's such a stupid gimmick, Mr. Ass. So, yes, Billy Gunn versus The Rock, SummerSlam 99. A Kiss My Ass match. Not great. Let's put it that way. Not great. So, I kind of wanted to talk about how much I loved SummerSlam 99, but also how silly that match is, you know? So, is there anything else you want to say about SummerSlam's past, or shall we wrap things up?
Let's wrap things up.
Hooray! Well, thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully you check out some of these picks. Even if you want to torture yourself, go back and watch some of the not so good ones. If you want, you know, I'm sure Diesel versus Mabel holds up really well in 2020. But yes, let us know what your favorite SummerSlam matches are, or what some of your least favorite SummerSlam moments are. God knows, there's probably a lot that we missed. And we're going to be back next week with a review of SummerSlam, and we're going to talk about this Thunderdome thing. I'm very excited about that. But until then, guys, take it easy, and we'll see you in the next episode.